Hello, it's good to see you. Today I thought we would have a little chat about strength. I was just talking to my dad on the phone earlier, and we got to talking about stories from the past. He was telling me about his grandfather and just, I don't know, just some funny things that happened and some interesting things. And, I learned a little bit about my great-grandfather. It was really interesting. And I got to thinking about some of the women in my life, particularly my great-grandmother and my great-great-aunt and one of my grandmothers. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about them. Now, every now and then I bring them up just in passing in videos. I might mention something one of them did or said, but I don't know that I've ever talked about them at length. I did do a video a couple of years ago where I was showing you things from my, I have this box of pictures and letters and things. I think it's, like I called it my memory box or something. I think I told you a bit about it then, but honestly, I don't remember. I haven't watched it in a long time, so I couldn't tell you. But what I did this evening after I got off the phone with my dad, I started going through some of my pictures. And there was one picture in particular of my great-great-aunt that I really wanted to show you. And I couldn't find it, and I'm so frustrated. I spent a half hour looking for that picture. I went through all of my albums. And I know I have it. It's like a big 8x10, and I stuck it in a photo album, and I cannot find it now. So it's going to bug me until I find that picture. But it was a picture of her when she was about 19 or 20 years old. Now, she was born back in the 1880s, and I was very fortunate to get to know her when I was very young. Now, she did die when I was very young, but I have very vivid memories of her. And she was such an awesome lady, and I wish she was here. I think she would be a real comfort. I mean, she was just such an awesome lady. One of these people that you meet, they just have their head on their shoulders, very independent, very resourceful, very smart. She was my favorite person when I was a kid, but unfortunately she passed away when I was young. But she lived to a ripe old age. But yeah, I wanted to tell her about her. In fact, I was named for her. Now, that was Aunt Mary. That's what everybody called her. She was Aunt Mary. In fact, my dad said that when he was in Vietnam back in 67 and 68, he could address a letter to her and just put Aunt Mary in the town, the city, and the state, and it would get to her because everybody knew who she was. She was everybody's Aunt Mary. She was an awesome lady. I was really hoping I could show you the picture of her when she was young. She was so beautiful. It's a really good picture of her too. Of course, back then they didn't smile in pictures. So this would have been in the really, really early 1900s. Yeah, so she was born, I don't remember the exact year, I'll be honest, but I think it was in the late 1880s, but I could be wrong about that. But of course, she has a serious look on her face because she has her hands in her lap, and it's a really cool picture. But I did find a few pictures of her. They're all when she's older, though. Like here's one. Now here's one of her. I'm going to put it right here. Now she had a sister, and they actually are part of my family by marriage. They aren't like blood relatives. Now, her sister was my dad's grandmother. Yeah, so she's family by marriage. But her father had money, and now they lived in a small community, but he was fairly wealthy. He basically owned this community, and he owned all the land, he owned all the houses. He had a company store and 2 mills. There were 2 textile mills, and he owned them. And people would come and live in the community in the houses that he owned, and they would pay him rent and work for him and buy things from his store. And that is where he said he got his money from. But, and I can't have no proof of this, but the rumor was that's not where all of his money came from. What they said was that he was in the opium trade, and he made most of his money selling opium up and down the East Coast. Now, I don't know if that's true. Now, this would have been back in the 1800s, early 1900s. I don't know. But when everything crashed in 1929 and the Depression hit, he lost everything. And I think he died fairly destitute. He did die of old age not too long after that, and he didn't do it to himself or anything. But when Aunt Mary was growing up, they had money, and during that time, she got married. She married a man that I don't think her father approved of very much, and I never knew him. I didn't ever get to know him, but they said he was kind of a layabout. He wouldn't really work, and he was just kind of a lazy dude. But she loved him. Oh, she loved him so much. She didn't care. She didn't care how anybody felt about him. She married him because she wanted to. And he didn't have any money. Well, they lived off her father's money, I believe, but she also started her own business in a time when women just didn't do that sort of thing. Women didn't own businesses. They didn't run shops. She did. Aunt Mary had her own business. Now, her father gave her some land and he built her a house and gave her the land and the house. And I'll put a picture of the house right here. I remember this house. Oh, it's bigger than it looks. There's a whole other part of it in the back that you can't see in the picture. It's actually a very large house. I can still remember what it smelled like in there. It was made out of heart pine, and it had that smell. It always smelled like fresh baked biscuits and heart pine. I don't know any other way to describe it. It was wonderful. I still remember going there. It was my favorite place to go as a child, was to go to Aunt Mary's house. But anyway, okay, so she got married to this layabout. All she ever wanted was to have kids. Unfortunately, they were not able to have children. They never had children, and it broke her heart. She always wanted to have kids. But she became like a grandmother to so many young people, more than one generation. Like, she was everybody's Aunt Mary. She's everybody's grandma, basically. And she was kind of like a second mom to my dad, too. And she was very special. But so she started her own store. And she never drove. She did not have a license. She did not have a car, which was fairly common. Most women back during her time didn't drive and didn't have cars. She walked everywhere she went, for the most part. I remember her telling me a story. I still remember this. The first time she ever saw an automobile, she said it was a big deal. She was young. She was a young girl, but she was in town. And all of a sudden, this man comes running down the street and starts yelling, "Get the horses off the street! Get the horses off the street! There's an automobile coming!" And it was a big deal that an automobile was coming, and it would freak the horses out. So they had to get all the horses away from the road. And she said it was the first time she had ever seen an automobile. And she said it was just the most amazing thing she had ever seen. She couldn't believe it. And she said that just stuck with her as one of her favorite memories as a child, the first time she ever got to see an automobile. I just cannot imagine what that must have been really something. So, yeah, she always wanted to have children. Could not have children. She started a store. And it was I believe she sold fabrics, sewing notions. It was like a fabric store for the most part. And she would also make dolls. I got to show you this. I forgot. Hang on just a second. And she made dolls. And that was something that she would do. She made some to sell and some to give away. And I have one that she made for me right after I was born. And my mother had it put in this box frame. She made this for me when I was a little baby. You can see that it has blonde hair and blue eyes, and she put lace around it. So this was the one that she made for me, and I understand that when they found out they were going to name me after her, she was really just over the moon with that. She thought that was awesome. I can't imagine her ever using the word awesome, but whatever her equivalent of that was, she was very touched that they named me after her. So yeah, so she made this for me, and my mom had it put in this frame for me, and actually it hangs in my closet in there. I love that. So the store was several miles from her house, but she would take a shortcut through the woods, and she would walk to her store every day and run her store, and she managed the books and everything to go with it. She did it all herself. And my father sometimes would walk with her if he was out of school, and he said he could barely keep up. I mean, you know, she was in her 40s. She was like my age, and he said I couldn't keep up with her. I can't. She walked so fast I couldn't keep up. I'd have to about run to keep up with her. He said she could really move. She was fast. But her husband passed away. I'm thinking it was in the early 40s. Yeah, was it in the 40s? He was not an old man. He had cancer. I believe he had lung cancer and died fairly young. And she never remarried, and people were always pressuring her, you know, why don't you get remarried? Why don't, you know, it's not good for you to be by yourself. And she would always tell them the same thing. She said, I already had a husband. I don't need another one. I already had one. I already had one. She, to the best of my knowledge, never cared to remarry. And she never, I don't think she ever had any relationship with any man after that. She stayed by herself in that great big house and kept working. She never had a phone. She never had a telephone, which bugged my dad. He kept trying to get her to have a phone put in. She said, why do I want something in my house where people can call me and bother me? She said, now if you can get a phone installed where I can call other people, but they can't call me, I'll take that. And he said, they don't work that way, Aunt Mary. You can't get a phone like that. And if everybody had a phone like that, what'd be the point? She said, well, I don't know, but that's the only phone you'll ever put in my house. So she would not get a phone. She had no interest in a telephone. But back in, I want to say the early teens, like around 1915 or something, all of the women in her area would grow their hair long. You know, they had long hair, and they would wear it in a bun or something. You know, they would wear it up all the time. They wouldn't wear it down. They would always have it up. Well, one day she got sick and tired of it. And this is one of the stories that I heard from family members. I didn't hear this from her. Well, one day she got sick of that hair. She said what she told the family was, I got tired of having to brush it out and wash it and maintain it. And one day she just went up to the beauty parlor and said, I want you to cut my hair. I want you to cut it off. I'm getting rid of it. I don't want long hair anymore. And they wouldn't cut it. They would not, at the beauty shop, they would not cut her hair. They said, no, no, no. You can't do that. I refuse to do it. She ended up going to a barber shop and found some guy at a barber shop that would do it. And I think she had to pay him extra, but she got her hair chopped like short. And she wore her hair short from then on. She never grew it out again. People, it was scandalous. Like, women didn't, you know, you don't do that. She didn't care. And that's one of the things I loved about Aunt Mary, and I have always admired. She really lived her life on her terms. It didn't matter to her what other people thought she should be doing. She would look at the situation and say, okay, I understand what they're saying, but here's what I think I should do. This is the way I think I should handle this, and this is what I want, so I'm going to do it. And that is the way she lived her entire life. She was very independent, very stubborn, very strong-willed, but she was also one of the most generous, caring people you would ever meet. She was amazing. And yeah, so I wanted to tell you that. Oh, before I forget. Okay, so here she is again. And I wish I could find that picture of her when she was younger. I gotta find that picture. She was so beautiful. Well, she still is. But you can see these pictures are from back in the 50s and 60s. And here's one. Okay, here's one. You see, you're going to see a picture here with two young ladies playing badminton out in front of her house. She had a badminton net set up, apparently. The one over here, I think she's on the right, in a plain white dress. That's my mom. That was my mom. My mom knew her back then, too. I think that was back when she was dating my dad. I don't think they were married yet. But my mom loved her, too. Everybody that met her just fell in love with her because she was so awesome. She really was amazing. But here, let me show you this one again. This is a picture of her. This is the picture of her house again. There is a woman, and I don't know who this woman is in this picture. There's some young lady standing in front of the house, and you can't really see her because it's kind of from a distance. I always like to kind of imagine it's me, because it kind of looks like me a little bit in a skirt. And the hair, you know, I have no idea who this person is. I've shown the picture to both of my parents. They don't know who it is either, but it's just kind of cool. I just imagine it's me standing in front of her house. So that's St. Mary. And I wanted to tell you also about my great-grandmother, Lena. Now, Lena, I never knew. Now, she passed away before I was born. So that's, yeah, my great-grandmother. I'm going to show you a picture of Lena, and I think this picture is going to pretty much tell you a lot about her. It's going to tell you everything you need to know. Here's my great-grandmother. That's Lena. Okay. You do not mess with this woman right here. Look in her eyes. Look at her. She looks like she would just kill somebody with her bare hands. Okay, that's Lena. That's my great-grandmother. She had an incredibly hard life. She had 8 children, and they had a farm, and they barely had enough to live on. They sold some vegetables. They would raise chickens, sometimes cows, to sell or eat themselves. But they lived a very hard life. In fact, here, I'm going to show you this picture right here. This is a picture, the taller girl in this picture with that check dress, that's my grandmother. That's one of Lena's 8 children right there. She lost one son to the Spanish flu in 1917 or 18. I don't remember when, but they lost a child to the flu. Look at these children's faces. Now, my grandmother in this picture is about 12 years old. Look at her face. Look at the faces of those kids. They, you know, kids who grew up back then lived a life that kids today couldn't even imagine. I couldn't even imagine it. You know, I grew up poor, but not like they did. They lived a very hard scrabble, hand-to-mouth life. And part of the problem was my great-grandfather was an alcoholic. He had a serious drinking problem. And he would just take off and be gone on a bender for a week or 2 at a time and leave her with all these kids and this farm to run all by herself. They didn't have any hired hands or anyone to help him. It was just the kids and Lena and my grandfather, and that's it. And they were way out in the middle of nowhere. They didn't have any neighbors. There was nobody around to help them. There was nobody for miles. It was just them on this little patch of land and a little house and all these kids. And he would just go off and take what little bit of money they had, and he would go off and buy booze and get drunk and just stay gone. So Lena got tired of being left to deal with it all by herself over and over, and this went on for years. And finally, one day he came back. He'd been gone. And she'd had it, and she just said, okay, you stay gone until you sober up and you never touch another drop of alcohol. Don't come back here until you can stop drinking, because all you're doing is causing problems for everybody. So just stay gone. And he did. He stayed gone for about 3 years. He didn't come back. And Lena had to take care of everything while he was gone, and she did with those kids. And they, of course, you know, children from a very young age would have to help out. They would have to do everything they could. And this was back when you didn't have washers and dryers and grocery stores. And, you know, if you didn't work for it, you didn't have it, basically. And if you got sick, you know, good luck to you. I mean, you know, there just were not any modern conveniences. They didn't have a vehicle. They didn't have any way to get around. I mean, she was just basically marooned there like on a desert island. And he came back about 3 years later, sober, and to the best of my knowledge, he never drank again. And he lived to be 97. It's amazing. He actually, I remember him vaguely. He passed away when I was young as well, but I have a vague recollection of him. I remember he was a tiny man. He was only about 5'2". He was a slight little guy. But he sobered up, he straightened up, and I think they stayed together. I don't know. I mean, I don't think he ever drank again after that. I think if he ever drank again, she probably would have killed him with her bare hands. But now Lena was tough. I do know a story about my grandmother, you know, the one in the check dress. Now, my grandmother was one of the older children of the 8. And when one of her when my great grandmother was pregnant, she was out in the fields. They had these fields, you know, with all their whatever crops they were growing, and she went into labor, and she managed to get back to the house, and there was nobody there except the kids. You know, my great grandfather was God knows where. This was before she sent him away, but she said. She sent one of the kids to go, the nearest neighbor was several miles away, sent one of the kids go to the house because they knew how to get in touch with the doctor. So my great-grandmother was in labor, said go get the doctor. My grandmother was like a mom to a lot of the younger kids. My grandmother at the time was 10 years old. 10. Now if you have a 10-year-old, I have a 10-year-old. Imagine doing this. Okay, she told my grandmother, get a meal ready for the doctor so he'll have something to eat. So that was the thing you did when the doctor came to your house. You wanted to have a nice meal prepared for the doctor when they got there. My grandmother had to go out to the chicken lot, kill a chicken, pluck it, cook it, dress it, cook it, prepare it, go out to the field, gather up whatever vegetables you can get, take them in the kitchen, cook them on a wood-burning stove, and prepare a meal with biscuits, vegetables, and chicken, and have a nice hot meal on the table when the doctor got there. Not only that, the doctor got there late, and my grandmother had to deliver the baby herself. Like, literally had to deliver her baby sister. And fortunately, there weren't any problems, but my grandmother had to deliver the baby, clean it up, cut the cord, clean up everything. And by the time the doctor got there, she kept the meal warm on the stove there, delivered the baby, had a nice hot meal for the doctor, and the baby was all wrapped up and ready for the doctor to check out my great-grandmother at 10 years old. And that's why I also count my grandmother as an amazing woman as well, because that was the lifestyle that she had to live. Lena had 5 boys and 3 girls, and one of the boys died from the Spanish flu, and he was just a toddler at the time. And I think that contributed to some of my great-grandfather's drinking problems. I don't know, but I think he had problems before that, so I'm not excusing it. But here's a picture here's Lena holding my grandmother. This was not long after she and my great-grandfather got married. That is my grandmother on her lap. And if you look at her face, I love to look at the faces of people in these older pictures. Look at that. That is the face of somebody who has had to deal with really rough times. This is actually her wedding ring right here. My grandmother got it when my great-grandmother passed away. And my grandmother gave it to my mother, and my mother gave it to me. This was the only piece of jewelry, like real jewelry that my great-grandmother ever owned was this little tiny gold band right here. And I wear it in every Harvest video, not because Harvest is anything like Lena. Harvest tries to be what Lena really was. You know, Lena really knew what it was like to live from the earth. Harvest is a poser, and Harvest couldn't hold a candle to my great-grandmother, but I like minimal jewelry for Harvest, so she wears my great-grandmother's wedding ring. And here she is when she was, this is my great-grandmother when she was older. She was a little bitty thing. I mean, she was never a large person. She was very petite. She maybe weighed 120 pounds. She was a little tiny lady. But from what I understand, she was one of the strongest people you would ever meet. In fact, one of her favorite things to do when her sons got older, she would go out and wrestle them out in the front yard. And she could hog tie her own kids. She could wrestle her boys to the ground and hog tie them with rope. I'm not kidding. And that was not them letting her win. She was just that strong. But people back then had to be strong, because if you weren't strong, you probably wouldn't survive very long unless you had money. And my family did not have money. It was a very meager existence, and it was very hard, I'm sure. You know, I think if they saw my life, they wouldn't be able to. They couldn't conceive of it. Like they would be blown away. Yeah. So I like to think about them during times like this. Things are hard. I know things are, and I think things are going to get a lot worse. I don't think we've seen the worst. I think the worst has not come yet. But draw on your strengths, because you do have strengths that you can draw on. You are stronger than you think you are. We all are. You have a strength down in you. You just have to find it and hang on to it every day. And I think about these women in my life. I think about my grandmother, my Aunt Mary, and my great-grandmother, and the things that they had to overcome basically by themselves. Aunt Mary was basically alone. My great-grandmother was basically alone. And my grandmother, during those years of her childhood, had to take on some very serious adult responsibilities that today would be considered child abuse. But back then, it was a Tuesday. You know, it was everyday life. It wasn't anything. Nobody would bat an eye at it. It's like, well, of course you're going to help your mother. Why wouldn't you? You know, that's what you're supposed to do. It was a very different life. But during this time, you know, one of the things I've done is I've tried to talk to both of my parents. My grandparents have all passed away, unfortunately, and I'm starting to lose aunts and uncles too. I've lost several just in the last few years. But I've talked to my parents some, and some of my older relatives. I have to do it by phone now, but you know, talk to some of your relatives, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, if you're lucky to have them still in your life, or your parents. You know, what was life like when you were young? You know, and just listen to their stories. And I think you will also find that you come from strong people too. And something about knowing that makes me feel stronger. It's like, yeah, you know, I come from strong stock. I can handle this. I can. It makes me feel better about myself. Gives you a little confidence boost to know that you come from such amazing people. So if you've never talked to your family before, now might be a good time to do it. If you have the opportunity, I think you should take advantage of it. I'm trying to do that. And, you know, I was always raised to have a great deal of respect for my elders, and it's very sad to see so many young people today who don't have that. You know, they see the elderly as someone to, you know, ridicule, and, you know, they're an object of scorn, and certainly not someone to be respected. That's inconceivable to me. I was raised to have a great deal of respect for my elders. I would never have thought to be that way toward my elders. You know, I was always taught to be very respectful, and listening to them tell me the stories of the things that they went through and the lives that they had to live gave me a tremendous amount of respect for them. And it helps me now to navigate challenges in my own life and to realize especially compared to what they had to live through. I can do this. I can get through things. I can do it. It's helped me at different points in my life when I've had to start over, basically. It's like, I can do this. One day at a time, I can take this and handle this and beat this. And I'm adopting the same idea these days. So, but it's just a thought, while you have a chance, talk to your elderly relatives. Find out what their lives were like and see what stories they have to tell you. You might learn a thing or two and see them a little differently. So, thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I am thinking of you. Y'all are on my mind every day, and I send you all my best. I'll see you again tomorrow.